The carriage door wrenched open, a gust of cold night air swept in, and a young woman fell into the seat opposite the Duke of Harrowdene as though the very devil were at her heels. She hauled the door shut behind her, pressed her back into the squabs, and breathed the word drive with such ferocity that, for an instant, Rupert wondered whether he ought to obey her himself. "Madam," he said, "I believe you are in the wrong carriage." She turned. The lamplight caught her face, and he watched the precise moment her terror curdled into horror, the eyes going wide, the lips parting, one gloved hand rising to her throat. "Oh," she said. "Oh no." And then faintly, "Wrong carriage. I've climbed into the wrong carriage." "You have." He did not move to open the door for her. He told himself afterward that this was because the matched greys had already started forward at her command, and a moving carriage was no place to be flinging doors about. It was not entirely a lie. But neither was it the whole truth, and the Duke of Harrowdene had long made a practice of knowing the difference. "Harrowdene," he said, by way of introduction, as though they had met across a drawing-room and not in the dark of his own conveyance. "I know who you are." She said it before she could stop herself, and then coloured to the roots of her hair, which even the poor light he could see was the soft brown of a wren's wing. "That is, everyone knows. They say you've never danced with anyone 2 seasons running. They say you looked at Lady Marchmont's daughter, as though she were a column you were obliged to walk around." "Did I?" He found, to his mild astonishment, that he was close to smiling. "And who is it that I have the misfortune of not dancing with tonight?" "Felicity Dawn." She lifted her chin a fraction, as if bracing for the blankness that name usually summoned. "You won't have heard of me. No one has. I am the sort of person who is asked to hold other ladies' fans while they dance." He had not heard of her. That was true. But he found he did not like the small, practiced flatness with which she announced her own invisibility, as if she had said it so many times the words had worn smooth. "And what," he asked, "were you fleeing, Miss Dawn, when you mistook my carriage for your salvation?" The flatness cracked. For a moment she only looked at her hands. Then it came out of her in a rush, the way a thing will when it has been held too tight too long. She had been standing by the orangery, she said, where she always stood, near the palms, where a wallflower might be decently overlooked. And she had overheard 2 gentlemen, she would not name them, wagering. One had bet the other 10 guineas that no man in the room could be induced to lead the Dawn creature out for a single dance. And the other laughed, she said, and said he would not do it for 50. And I had been holding Miss Fairweather's fan, so I set it down on the nearest table and I walked out, and I climbed into the first carriage I saw, because I could not stand in that room one moment more and be a thing that men refused to dance with for 50 guineas. She stopped. She pressed her lips together hard. She did not cry, and the Duke of Harrowdene, who had buried a great many soft feelings under a great many years of cold ones, felt something in his chest turn over at the sheer effort of that refusal. "What were their names?" he said. It was not a question. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." She looked up at that, startled, and for a long moment the carriage rocked them gently through the dark and neither of them spoke. He was aware, with an unfamiliar acuteness, of the small particulars of her, a glove with a mended seam at the wrist, a hem that had been turned and turned again, the way she sat very straight as though good posture were the last fortune she had left and she meant to keep it. He had spent 3 seasons being pursued, flattered, schemed at, and presented with daughters like dishes at a banquet, and he had grown so weary of being wanted for his title that he had forgotten there was any other way to be looked at. Felicity Dawn was not looking at his title. She was looking at him as though he were a stranger who had been unexpectedly kind and did not quite know what to do about it. That was the moment, he would tell her years afterward, though she never quite believed him. "You have a difficulty, Miss Dawn," he said, rather larger than 2 gentlemen and their wager. I am aware that I am in a duke's carriage at night with no chaperone, she said, with a sudden, surprising tartness. I have been aware of it since approximately the word drive. You needn't dress it up. I am ruined. By morning everyone will know, and I shall be sent to my aunt in Yorkshire, who keeps geese and disapproves of conversation. She drew a breath. I am sorry, truly. I have made you part of a scandal you did nothing to earn. If you will only set me down at the next corner, I'll walk, and I'll say I went alone, and I'll... You will do no such thing. He had not raised his voice. He never raised his voice. It was one of the things that frightened people. But she stopped at once. You will not walk anywhere alone in the dark. And you will not take a scandal upon yourself to spare a duke an inconvenience, as though my name were made of glass and yours of nothing. She stared at him. Tell me the names, he said again, gently this time. And because there was nothing left to lose, she told him. He did not so much as change expression, and she could not have known what those two names cost two young men. In the months that followed, in invitations not extended and credit quietly called in and doors that no longer opened, for the Duke of Harrowdene was not a man who shouted, but he was a man with a very long memory and a very long reach. She only saw him nod once, as if filing the matter away, and then turn the full weight of those dark eyes upon her with an expression she had no name for, because no one had ever directed it at her before. Miss Dawn, he said, we are, as you observe, thoroughly compromised. Yes, I'm so sorry. I am not finished. A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. We are thoroughly compromised, and there is, as it happens, a single remedy that society will accept, which is that the gentleman in question marry the lady. It is an old and tedious rule. I have always thought it absurd. He paused. I find tonight that I have no objection to it whatsoever. The silence that followed was so complete he could hear the harness creak. You needn't, she whispered. You needn't, only to be honourable. I would never hold you to... Felicity. It was the first time he had used her name, and he saw her catch her breath at it. I have spent 3 years walking around young women as though they were columns. I have been hunted for a coronet I did not ask for by people who would not have crossed the street for me without it. And then a wren of a girl falls into my carriage, fleeing the cruelest sort of cowards, and apologizes to me for inconveniencing my consequence, when she is the one who has been wounded, and asks for nothing. He leaned forward just slightly into the lamplight. Do you know how long it has been since anyone in a ballroom wanted nothing from me? She shook her head, mute. Neither do I, he said. It has been that long. The carriage was slowing. Through the window the dark bulk of his estate had begun to rise against the stars, lamps burning gold in the long windows, and somewhere a clock was striking the hour they had, between them, made unrecoverable. Rupert reached up and, deliberately, latched the door, the small brass click of it loud in the quiet, though they had long since stopped any pretence that she might fling herself out into the night. There, he said, now you cannot escape me, and I cannot pretend you might. The wrong carriage, you said. She looked at the latched door, and then at him, and something was happening to her face that he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. The slow, disbelieving dawn of a person who has been overlooked so long she has forgotten what it is to be seen, learning it again all at once. A glove had fallen from her lap to the carriage floor between them, forgotten. Her fan, abandoned somewhere on a stranger's table, would never be returned. The right one, actually, said the Duke of Harrowdene, and reached down and picked up her glove. He did not return it to her. He held it, that small mended thing, as though it were a thing worth keeping, and watched her understand that he meant to keep it, and meant to keep her, and that the keeping was not a duty but a wish, perhaps the first true wish of his guarded heart in longer than he could say. Marry me, he said, not because we are compromised, though we are. Marry me because I sat in this carriage a tired man who had given up expecting to be glad of anything, and you climbed in by mistake and made me glad. Marry me, Felicity Dawn, and I will dance with you every season for the rest of my life, and let the whole of London choke on their 10 guineas. And Felicity, who had been asked for nothing all her life and offered less, who had walked out of a ballroom rather than be a thing men refused to touch, began helplessly to laugh, and the laugh to tears and back to laughter, and she put her hand into his offered one, mended glove and all, and says, "Oh, yes, though I warn you, I am a dreadful dancer. No one has ever taught me." "Then I shall teach you," he said, "very badly, in this very carriage, the first chance I have." And he was smiling now without any reserve at all, the cold gone out of his face as though it had never been. "And I shall step on your feet, and you shall step on mine, and we shall be the worst dancers in England, and the happiest." When the footman opened the door upon the gravel and the gold lamplight, he found his master the Duke of Harrowdene handing down a young woman no one had ever heard of as though she were a queen, her hand fast in his, her face wet and shining, a single glove forgotten on the seat behind them, because its mate would never again be parted from his keeping. She had climbed into the wrong carriage. He told her so every anniversary of that night for 40 years, and every year she answered him, in the firelight of the house that had become her home, with her grey head against his shoulder and his arm around her as it had been from the first, the right one actually. And the Duke of Harrowdene, who had once around the whole bright world as though it were a column he was obliged, would hold her closer and know that he had been all along exactly where he was meant to be.